When David Crane was upset with the way he was being treated at Atari, he left the company and formed Activision. Activision would produce excellent games, and the company would continue to be successful even decades later. However, there were other third-party companies that formed from Atari, but you never hear about these ones. Why is that? And did they have the same impact? Let's take a look. What's going on? It's Podrez coming at you with another video. Right before we start, if you've seen a couple of my videos and you like what I do, hit that subscribe button right there. It only takes a second, but it helps our community grow. And if you didn't know, we do have a Discord server. Just go to discord.podrez.net. I'll also put a link right in the description. Alright, let's talk about some of the third-party companies on the Atari 2600.
You not good enough for Demon Attack!
Just for that demon!
You in big trouble! I'm winning!
Good work, Voltar. Demon Attack really is tough. Imagic Demon Attack.
When Ray Kassar took over as CEO of Atari, employees started leaving the company one by one. Kassar was not well liked. Developers felt underappreciated under his administration because they were not being credited for the games they were developing. If you look at a box or cartridge from any Atari game from the late 70s or early 80s, you're not going to see the developers' names anywhere. There was also no incentive if your game sold well. Just imagine making the next big hit, but you don't make any more than your base pay. David Crane, who was one of the most prominent developers of Atari, voiced his concerns to Kassar, but he dismissed them. David Crane and a few others were disappointed with Ray Kassar and Atari, so they came up with the unthinkable. They created the first ever third-party game company, Activision. So what does third-party actually mean? It's when you don't have your own console, but instead you make games for other ones. This type of thing had never been done before. Under Activision, they were able to implement a lot of the changes they wanted while still at Atari. Their boxes actually did credit the developers. The games also had colorful graphics to stand out from first-party games. Speaking of games, they did have a few standout titles. Pitfall was a shockingly large adventure game with 255 screens despite only being a 4KB game. River Raid was a vertically scrolling shooter that used a numeric algorithm to deliver a huge game using only 4KB of ROM space. Kaboom was an addictive survival game where you must collect all the bombs without missing any. Atari tried to stop Activision's success with a lawsuit. They claimed that former employees were using confidential information from their time at Atari to help with Activision. The lawsuit would be settled out of court, and Activision agreed to pay royalties to Atari. Despite the setbacks, they continued to triumph. Activision was founded on happy employees that actually wanted to work for the company. Activision wasn't the only one. Other employees of Atari, including Rob Falop, who developed Missile Command on the 2600, were also unsatisfied with the company that they worked for, so they created the second third-party video game company, Imagic. Rob Falop claims that the reason he left Atari was because rather than giving him a Christmas bonus, they instead gave him a coupon for a free turkey at Safeway. Imagic's goal was to overtake Activision and become the largest third-party company. Their games had a very distinct cartridge with an extended ridge on the top. Imagic has a few standout titles. In Atlantis, you have bases you have to protect against airborne enemies. They can inflict massive damage on your bases, but you're able to shoot them down. Imagic ran a contest where whoever got the highest score could take a picture of their TV screen and mail it to Imagic, and then win a copy of Atlantis 2, which is now an extremely rare game. Cosmic Ark is the official sequel to Atlantis. This is a two-part game where in the first part you're using the joystick to block enemies from reaching the center, and in the second part you're picking up life forms and bringing them to the Ark. This is one of my favorite 2600 games of all time. The game Demon Attack has a very interesting history. Rob Falop, you know, the guy that got the free turkey, didn't feel like he was being properly reimbursed for the 2600 version of Space Invaders while he was still at Atari. So he set out to make a game that was so good, Atari would be upset. As a result, we would get Demon Attack. It's a shooter where you must destroy the enemies without getting hit. When you advance further in the game, there's new demons that have different attributes. All three of these games were great, and they were Imagic's best-selling titles. Similar to Activision, Atari would try to slow down Imagic's success with a lawsuit. They pointed out how similar Demon Attack is with Atari's arcade port, Phoenix, which they had the home console license to. The lawsuit would be settled out of court. We don't know much otherwise. Imagic initially saw a lot of success and grew a lot in its first 3 years. However, the company was hit hard by the video game crash of 1983. They would lay off 40 employees out of a total of 170 in order to stay alive. They would release 24 games total before going out of business, which means Imagic did not unfortunately reach their goal of overtaking Activision. So as we can see, quite a few employees were not satisfied with Atari and decided to jump ship. But there was one more company that wanted to make an impact. In 1980, Pat Roper was playing football on the Intellivision. He didn't know anything about the video game industry, but saw potential in it. He was already president of Natural Career Consultants, which was a company that made educational films, but he wanted to try his hand in video games, so he formed the company Games by Apollo, or just Apollo. Roper had an interesting strategy. Rather than trying to recruit game developers from Atari or Mattel, he placed advertisements in magazines about open positions. A young programmer, Ed Salvo, saw one of the ads and contacted Apollo about a game he made called Skeet Shoot. Here, you play as a skeet shooter, obviously, and you're shooting clay pigeons above you. You can only shoot one bullet per turn, and sometimes it's literally impossible to hit the target. I bet you Todd Rogers probably could have gotten that. The game doesn't have much polish. You just shoot at the clay pigeons until you hit 10 of them, and then the game is over. The graphics, even for Atari standards, could be better, and the game itself is nothing special. However, Roper liked the game so much and he hired Salvo on as a lead developer. Salvo would make a follow-up game, Spacechase. It's a top-down shooter where you must destroy the enemies above. You can move in 8 directions and the screen continuously scrolls vertically. It's really ambitious that they made a game from this perspective. It doesn't really look like I'm orbiting this planet, but I respect the attempt. This is a much better game than Skeet Shoot, and this would be Apollo's best-selling game. Salvo jump-started the company by delivering 2 games to the public, so the next step was to hire more developers. In its peak, the company would have 30 employees total. With a whole new team on board, let's see what they came up with. Here's Infiltrate. You play as a secret agent who must grab the documents while avoiding the enemies. You have elevators that you can go up and down in. The game is playable, although the controls are very weird. You can't actually walk into the elevators. Instead, the game automatically snaps you in if you're next to it. You also can't shoot while you're on the elevators, so you're completely defenseless when you're there. The enemies are hard to kill because they almost always get a shot off themselves. The enemies also respawn too quickly and sometimes even respawn on top of you. The game really needs an adjustment in controls because otherwise this is decent. Now for Lost Luggage. You play as an airport employee who must collect the falling luggage without missing any. If you do, you lose a life. The game has a funny backstory. The programmer that we talked about earlier, Ed Salvo, thought of the idea while he was waiting for his luggage at the Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. The game has a striking resemblance to Kaboom, except you can use the joystick and you're not limited to 2-directional movement. The graphics are great for Atari standards. You see the plane landing in the background, and when you miss a suitcase, all of them open up and reveal articles of clothing. They didn't have to go the extra mile, but they did. This is one of Apollo's best games for sure. The next game we'll look at is somewhat controversial. You play as a scuba diver who must maneuver through the maze and collect all the diamonds. Sharks will move horizontally across the screen and try to attack you. The game is similar to Pac-Man, except you can move more freely through the maze. However, sometimes you can get stuck in between walls, which is very annoying. The sharks are pretty easy to avoid because their pattern is very predictable. However, the diamonds that are close to the edge of the screen are harder to get because of the nature of the shark's AI. Not my favorite Apollo game, but not bad either. This game would be subject to a lawsuit, but not because of the nature of the gameplay. The title of the game was Lockjaw and was released in very limited quantities under that name. When MCA, who owns Universal Studios, took notice of this, they threatened legal action because of the name being similar to the movie Jaws. Apollo did not want to fight that legal battle, so they reluctantly changed the name to Shark Attack. Since the original Lockjaw cartridges were released in such low numbers, this version is extremely rare. Apollo's first couple games were nothing special, but their later releases were actually decent. Unfortunately, however, they did not see the success that they wanted. Roper was obsessed with emulating Activision's success and wanted to one-up them in every aspect. For example, he wanted Apollo to make $27 million their first year because Activision made $26 million their first year. They even planned on making their campus slightly bigger than Activision's, with 8 buildings that are 8 stories each instead of 7 buildings that are 7 stories each like Activision had. It was all about being just a little bit better than Activision. Some of their games were even similar to Activision ones. Roper did not have a realistic goal and was not spending his money wisely. Some employees at Apollo realized that Roper was not making the right efforts to keep the company alive long term, so they would end up quitting, including his original programmer Ed Salvo. Only 2 weeks after Salvo left, the company would declare bankruptcy. Atari mistreating their employees would indirectly result in some good things happening. The formation of Activision would mean that developers would be recognized for their work and we would see some great games. Imagic had a similar upbringing and we would see some more great titles. The company Apollo, however, bit more than they could chew. Some of their games were decent, but the CEO's unrealistic goal of beating Activision would end up being detrimental to the company. Unfortunately, neither Imagic nor Apollo would end up seeing the same success as Activision. Hey, I just wanted to thank you so much for watching this video. If you made it this far, hit that like button. If you enjoy this type of content, hit the subscribe button for more content. Both of these things really help the channel grow. If you have anything to share, feel free to leave a comment. I read every single comment on this channel, and I'm pretty good at replying back. Anyway, have a good one.